Europe in 1945, and the scale of those losses, when you see them depicted in that way, with the silhouettes of each of the aircraft concerned, is really quite humbling. It's in tribute to all of those servicemen and more on the Allied side, to which tribute is paid by the sole airworthy B17 flying fortress in Europe. And Colin, watching it over Duxford, a US Army Air Force's fighter station, of course, allows us to recall the presence of the Americans, not just here, but across the whole of East Anglia with the 8th Air Force.
Yes, the impact of the arrival of the 8th Army Air Force must have been quite something here in East Anglia, which back in the 1940s was a very remote part of England. The only Americans that those people will have seen will probably have been those stars of the silver screen. And some of them, in fact, became locals, because Clark Gable, probably the most famous, possibly the most famous actor of all time, back in 1939 when he was in Gone with the Wind, suddenly he is based here in East Anglia. And Jimmy Stewart as well, of course, was another man who became part of the 8th Army Air Force. Most of those guys, you have to remember, were only 19, 20, and the action took part in the skies over Europe, about 20,000 feet, something like that, in temperatures of minus 30 degrees. The windows were open, the wind would be howling through, and you would be fighting the cold, let alone the enemy.
Enemy fighters and flak.
Yes, in fact, as the air war developed over Germany in particular, the effect of flak became more dangerous, in fact, than the fighters. The development of radar-controlled artillery certainly had a dramatic effect on the losses that the 8th Army Air Force and indeed the British RAF suffered. Was really, really dramatic. It's worth remembering, or it's a coincidental thing really, that the first attack was conducted by the 8th Army Air Force from Grafton Underwood, up near Kettering, and the leader of that flight was actually Paul Tibbets, a name that would be familiar to you, because he went on to pilot the Enola Gay, which at the end of the war dropped the bomb, the atomic bomb, on Japan.
First raid to marshalling yards at Rouen in France took place 80 years ago this summer, involving B-17s.
Indeed. And those early raids were actually quite successful, and there was a lot of optimism because the conditions were almost perfect. However, it became a different story when they attacked places like Schweinfurt in Germany, where particularly the German fighters had learned where the weak spots were on those B-17s, and they did take a terrible toll. 20,000 Allied or American servicemen died as a result of activities by the 8th Army Air Force and the 9th Army Air Force in Europe. Aspects of the daylight bombing raids, of course, was that they were aiming for precision bombing. Their training largely in the clear blue skies of California. They would use the northern bomb site and get really good results. However, in Europe, we've seen what conditions can be like. You know, the weather conditions are nothing like California, and also getting attacked by the artillery, the flak and the German fighters certainly reduced the success of those raids.
Yeah, we need to emphasise these were daylight bombing raids. Unlike RAF Bomber Command mainly striking by night, the 8th Air Force was attacking by day, German industrial targets, transport and resupply networks and so forth. escort fighters, first the P47 Thunderbolt and later the P51 Mustang came along. Obviously, a higher degree of protection was afforded, but the losses were still grievous.
They certainly were. But as we've already said, the arrival, particularly of the P51 Mustang, was a real game changer.
It was, and it's because of all of this heroism that we see Sally B continuing to fly as a flying memorial to the US Army Air Forces in particular, who flew out of the United Kingdom during World War II. This aircraft entirely privately operated from Duxford under the leadership of Ellie Sallingbow, as it has been for decades, operated privately in the UK since 1975 now, and given the sheer expense, not to mention the effort involved, this is a quite incredible record, and in that, the support given by members of the Sally B Supporters Club is absolutely crucial. As we were saying earlier, you can sign up today and do your bit to help keep this aircraft flying by going to their stand, which when the B17 parks up, again after the end of this display, is situated just in front of it with the Sally B flags flying, obviously at half-mast this weekend, but now definitely flying rather than earlier.
A few moments ago, the German Air Force quickly determined where the weak spots were. Frontal attack from beneath as well, and gradually, as the new models came along, there was much more armament. And the losses, together with the support of, particularly the support of the P51 fighters, the losses gradually were reduced.
Flying almost literally down to walking pace on landing. Beautiful. As we were saying, the team there ready and waiting to see you and sign you up as Supporters Club members once. On in 1943 to escort bombers, conducting raids on the island of Pantelleria and covering naval convoys in the Mediterranean, as well as assisting the Allied landings on Sicily. They went on to convert to Spitfire 8s and 9s. The 31st Fighter Group moved to Italy and the 52nd to Corsica. They provided coverage of the Allied landings at Salerno and at Anzio, and they carried on operating in close support of Allied ground forces through Italy and southern France. Assigned to the 15th Air Force in April and May 1944, they converted to P51 Mustangs. But the descendants of both those units are still in Europe today, with the modern US Air Force. The 31st Fighter Wing is at Aviano in Italy, the 52nd at Spangdahlem in Germany, both of them flying the F-16C Fighting Falcon. And this Spitfire 16, owned by Suffolk Spitfire, further remembers the 31st Fighter Group in particular because it's in its markings from when that group was part of the 12th Air Force, stationed at Pomigliano in Naples in late 1943. just those two US Army
aircraft formation display team in the country. There used to be another one, but they're down to 7 this season. They fly much noisier red aircraft, but we fly these delightful 1930s and 40s de Havilland DH-82A Tiger Moths. riveted displays today by Spitfires and Hurricanes, Gladiator, Lysander, you name it. No matter what the British and Commonwealth pilots flew, they would have had to be trained in the first place. And the vast majority of them did their initial training on this aircraft. It was the key primary trainer for British and Commonwealth of the leader, having to concentrate on keeping formation. And they become what the Germans referred to as Kaltefleischer, literally cold meat, but it means sitting ducks. And so they reverted back to a German tactic of a finger four, 2 pairs, leader and wingman each. Here they come through in fig formation.
Marines were conducting, able to carry bombs, napalm rockets, so it was very adaptable for these missions, and the Royal New Zealand Air Force flew it very successfully in both roles as well. As you can see, the Corsair now giving us a solo, this in the colours of 1850 Squadron of the Fleet Air Arm, and British experience was very useful in further refining the Corsair. The Fleet Air Arm suggested it should be given a bulged canopy to improve the pilot's vision, so they did that, and there were various other refinements as well. 18 squadrons of the Fleet Air Arm at this type's peak in Royal Navy service were equipped with Corsairs, and they served in the European theatre as well as in the Pacific. For example, when Operation Tungsten was launched in 1944 to attack the German battleship Tirpitz, Corsairs of the Royal Navy were involved. In 1945, flying from the carriers HMS Victorious and Formidable. And currently the only Corsair airworthy in the UK. An aeroplane that, much liked by its pilots for its excellent control response and harmonisation. One pilot I spoke to about flying the Corsair said he feels it's almost as good as the Spitfire at low level, if not better. Very nice. And here he is, in from the right, the Bearcat. And this is really its raison d'etre, pulling you to the vertical, and up and up and up it goes, just ever so slightly restricted in the climb there by the bit of cloud that's just drifted across the airfield. This, an aircraft with 2,100 horsepower from its Pratt & Whitney double Wasp radial engine. With a top speed in excess of 420 miles an hour. Classic combination, this, of a small airframe with a big engine, a successor to the very successful F6F Hellcat that had been so effective during the Pacific campaign. There were, of course, trade-offs with this, especially the often report, if using them, vision would effectively disappear for a few seconds after a carrier launch, and one pilot even said that even a strong, well-conditioned pilot couldn't hold his arms in front of them on a launch, let alone the flight controls. That said, you could get airborne from a carrier in a Bearcat without the need for the catapult shot if the conditions were right, so powerful was it. Another interesting feature of the design as it was first conceived was that they fitted explosive charges to blow off the outer 3 feet of the wingtips if the aircraft exceeded 8.5 G. The idea was that this would prevent a failure of the wing, but it wasn't adopted in production as the system almost always malfunctioned in testing and always blew just one of the tips off, with the handling difficulties that that would create. To service the Bearcat, but 24 frontline US Navy squadrons flew them. Pretty rapidly they were replaced in favour of the early jets of the US Navy, types like the F-2H Banshee and the F-9F Panther, but second line and training squadrons flew them. So did the US Navy demonstration team, the Blue Angels. On insurgents of the Viet Minh. Service, many Bearcats have been used as unlimited class air racers in the USA. As we can see, even a stock Bearcat like this one is a very impressive performer. Highly modified ones like Rare Bear, to give it its name, which dominated at Reno for many years and once set a new world speed record for piston-engined aircraft. Really if ever you get to see them being demonstrated to the full. And you just bear in mind when you're watching this aircraft, so fast as it's in this display, and indeed it looks so much quicker than any of the other piston fighters we've seen in today. In over the threshold comes the Bearcat, which was one of the first aircraft acquired by Stephen Gray in setting up his fleet of historic aeroplanes, which became the fighter collection, which always takes such pride of place at Duxford Air Shows. Pete Kinsey, their chief pilot, at the controls of the Bearcat. Now, before we continue with the rest of the display proper, we've got a departure slot for a number of aeroplanes to get out. We're going to be sticking to the original timings, so we're going to get people underway in a fairly leisurely fashion before we pick up the programme with our next act at just after 20 minutes past the hour. We're certainly going to get the Vampire from the Norwegian Air Force Historical Squadron away. This aircraft concluding its visit to the UK today. It's been here since April, parked for most of the time at Duxford between display appearances. But and also in this slot we're going to be getting the Hangar 11 P51 off to North Weald, and I think about half a dozen or so of the Tigers of the Tiger 9 also be heading home. Two after the aeroplane. Peter Teichmann then, the founder of the Hangar 11 collection, landing on after his display with the P51D Mustang. But now it's time for the enemy to take their place in today's programme, and representing the main Luftwaffe single-seat fighter of the Battle of Britain, the Messerschmitt. German pilots operating with Franco's nationalist forces. They first started operating the Bf-109 there in mid-1937.
Duxford in a different light. The Battle of Britain photography evening is an outdoor after-hours photography event dedicated to this pivotal moment in 20th century history. It's taking place this Thursday, that's the 15th of September. This Thursday, tickets are available to book now, and you can do that via the IWM website.